The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
We're proud that we're making an investment in our kids.
On Politics Now, the legislative session is over. We look at the state's biggest boost to education funding and the new mining tax deal.
Obviously, what we are trying to do is make sure that it is as easy as possible for people to get registered to vote.
Nevada expands mail-in voting and tries to leapfrog to the front of the primary line. We'll break down all the new election laws and rules. Plus, Nevada getting legal pot lounges. Just how soon tourists will have a place to smoke their marijuana.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
I move that the Senate of the 81st session of the Senate of the Legislature of the State of Nevada adjourn sine die.
There it is. After 120 days and a last-minute flurry of votes, the 2021 legislative session is over. We thank you for joining us here on Politics Now. I'm John Langler. Now, the I-Team's David Charnes, the only local TV reporter here from Southern Nevada to go up to Carson City for the end of the session. And David, you're here to kind of sort it all out. There was a lot that happened at the very end.
It was quite the end in the run-up to midnight there. And with control of both houses, Democrats were able to really get large chunks of their agenda passed. That means mail-in voting, that public health insurance option, and marijuana lounges. Well, all is calm now outside of the Nevada legislature, but in true Nevada style, lawmakers went up right until that deadline.
The 81st session of the Nevada legislature is adjourned.
Minutes before midnight Tuesday, the Senate and Assembly called an end to their 4-month session, one that brought changes to elections, policing, and taxes.
We helped small businesses, we helped the community, we helped students, we put money towards education that was never had happened before.
That money after lawmakers scrambled to reach a deal on taxing the mining industry. The bipartisan plan is expected to bring about $80 million into education every year.
Mining had a gun to their heads, don't kid yourselves. So I don't really even have a problem with mining pay a reasonable additional amount, but they got to be exceptionally careful.
Nevada will also move toward voting in primaries instead of caucuses. Assembly Speaker Jason Frierson says that proposal and expanded mail-in voting only makes the democratic process easier, with added protections for signature verification and the days ballots can be accepted.
We believe that as a constitutional right, people should have every option to fully participate.
Now you allow mail-in ballots to come in a little later, and so it's days, almost a week until you get your election results, and people automatically start to begin to get suspicious.
Decriminalizing traffic stops, creating a public health insurance option, and a new structure to regulate marijuana lounges.
There's just a lot of good things that happen, and I'm proud of them. We're going to take the bills one at a time.
The governor has 10 days to either sign a bill, veto it, or let it become law without his signature. He tells me what started as a big unknown with the coronavirus pandemic has ended with a feeling of hope and confidence.
All right, so here are some more details on that mining tax. It's an excise tax that'll be 0.8% for mines that make less than $20 million a year. Sites that make more than that, more than $20 million a year, they get bumped up to 1.1%. There are currently 103 mines of all sizes here in Nevada. Here's how Democrats and Republicans reacted to the measure.
Nevada, when our economy is based on all gaming, we don't survive. And so we have to diversify our economy. We have to do more with revenue. And we need to have a broader conversation about revenue. This is the beginning of that conversation. This is a good start.
In a statement, the chair of the Nevada Republican Party, Michael McDonald, said, quote, AB 495, much like any new tax introduced in Nevada, is a clear violation of the party's platform, the Republican Party's platform, and an unnecessary solution to a problem brought by the Democrats' inability to lead and govern. So, David, that mining tax, it's part of nearly $1 billion extra dollars that went to public education funding this session.
Yeah, a lot of talk about education this session. And yeah, in addition to that, there's actually about $500 million more dollars added to that going to that base per student funding. And then yet another $200 million in federal funding, coronavirus stimulus funding, that will add things like learning loss and work on child literacy. So you can probably call this the biggest investment in K-12 education that Nevada has made so far.
Now, there were also 2 ballot initiatives that teachers unions proposed before the pandemic. One was a gaming tax. There was also a sales tax. What was the future for those?
Well, there actually was a separate bill that would let them withdraw those two ballot initiatives. So the CCCA is expected to do that. So those won't be on the table.
All right. Well, Nevada may be the second state to offer a public option for health care. By the time this passed, AB 420, it had been amended several times. Washington State was the first to offer a public option for health care. Nevada's version requires that insurers that bid to provide coverage for people under Medicaid must also offer a public option plan. They'll be similar to other plans offered by the state exchange, but with a 5% markdown. But it's not going to take effect for a while now. They're not going to have to offer that option until 2026. Also from the legislative session, legal places to smoke pot. The bill creating consumption lounges has passed. There will be licenses for existing businesses and 20 independent ones as well. David, this has been an ongoing discussion here in Nevada, especially in southern Nevada with all the resort corridors. How long before these pot lounges are actually going to start opening up?
Well, first of all, the governor has to sign it. It's going to take a couple of months. Once he does sign it, we do expect him to do that. The Cannabis Compliance Board will still have to set up all the rules and regulations on how you're going to get a license for that. So it's going to take a while before businesses then apply for them. They have to be approved, open up, do the whole thing.
We've seen the song and dance before.
It may not be very soon, John.
What other maybe major marijuana legislation did pass up in Carson City?
Well, the bill to allow curbside pickup that a lot of folks had wanted during the pandemic also passed, and that started right away, so you can do that now. The other major one that would have allowed pop-up tents at events and festivals, though, did not pass.
And we profiled that issue on Politics Now a couple of weeks ago as well.
A lot of marijuana lobbyists up in Carson City, by the way, this session. Well, meantime, new sweeping clean energy legislation accelerates a huge transmission project and puts in more electric charging stations. We're talking about Green Link Nevada. It's a $2 billion project that basically links the entire state with two transmission lines. NV Energy, that is, has to finish it by 2029. That's 8 years from now. It requires a plan from NV Energy to spend $100 million on new electric vehicle charging stations all across the state. And it also takes the state's renewable energy portfolio standard, which we've told you about. It's that 50% by 2030, even further. Utilities now have to come up with a plan to see an 80% reduction in the 2005 carbon dioxide emission levels by then. NV Energy told us Senate Bill 448 will transform Nevada's clean energy landscape, create thousands of good-paying jobs, and ensure Nevada's underserved and low-income communities benefit from this energy transformation. Well, maybe you have one of these plates. The classic car loophole has been closed. Now, in order to get one of the plates, which exempts cars from a smog check, people will have to have classic car insurance. Maybe you drive one of those. A 2011 law just defined classic cars as any car that's over a certain age, which is why you've seen so many beat up ones on the road with those classic car plates, John.
All right, well, let's talk about some bills that did not pass the legislative session. We previously told you about a measure to try and end the death penalty that failed to pass. It's a bill from Senate Majority Leader NICOLE CANNIZZARO. It would have essentially also made casinos gun-free zones. That also didn't pass. That was pushed by MGM Resorts. A law that would have made it would have made it a crime to ignore signs on any business with signs that say no guns allowed. However, it had several stipulations, including a warning before staff could call police.
I obviously brought that legislation because I do think that we have to take gun violence here in this state seriously. I definitely believe that we should have tools to be able to enforce that. We have done that on a number of different occasions here in this state, and certainly while I've been in this building, with background checks to make sure that domestic abusers don't have access to guns, with making sure that our libraries, our government buildings, and other facilities like education facilities can ensure the safety of those individuals there, and this is no different from that.
So, David, as this went through the legislative process, there was an unusual group of opposition to it. A lot of different people were unopposed.
Yeah, something we don't normally see. There was opposition from Republican gun rights groups like the Nevada Firearms Coalition, which we would expect, in this day and age, but also progressive groups like Battleborn Progress and even the ACLU. Even pro-gun control groups like the Giffords Group had objections to this. Now, those objections were different than what Republicans objected to, but effectively killed this whole thing.
If both sides are against it, it's not going to go too far up in Carson City, though it did come pretty close to passing.
Yeah, and it's sort of, it's different this time. Usually we see things close in the Assembly or passed up the Assembly. This time it passed the Senate 11-10, which is more than the majority. A Republican voted for that, but though it did not make it out of the Assembly. All right, well, another thing that my I-Team colleague Vanessa Murphy covered would have created a licensing commission for midwives. This is Assembly Bill 387. It required a 2/3 vote because there were licensing fees for midwives associated with this. Nevada is the only state in the West that does not require midwives to be licensed. You can go watch Vanessa's story right now on our website, anewsnow.com. So this did pass out of the Assembly, but then it missed passing in the Senate by just one vote. 13-8, and it wasn't along any party lines either, John.
And you mentioned Vanessa, our own Vanessa Murphy, covered this issue deeply. Nevada now will still be the only state without the licensing for midwives. We have all those stories still on 8newsnow.com, though.
Interesting story, interesting topic for sure. Well, I did ask Governor SISOLAK if he had any favorite bills. You know, there's so many. This is what he said.
There's a lot of them that are favorites to me. I mean, the mining tax is incredible. It's huge. Like I said, my team worked so hard to get that across the finish line. I mean, fixing Dieter is big to me. It's important. There's so many. I mean, there's money that went towards medical school. There's just a lot of good things that happen.
A long legislative session is over. Good coverage up in Carson City. Hope you enjoyed your first session up there. Next on Politics Now, we do have more, believe it or not, on the legislative session. We're going to dig into the bill making Nevada the first to hold a presidential primary. We have reaction from New Hampshire and Iowa. Plus, Assemblyman Tom Roberts says he plans to run for sheriff. We'll talk about that.
.com 220. Welcome back to Politics Now.
I think the future is, as many pundits have said, that we'll become the first state to have a primary, because Iowa and New Hampshire have not been very representative of what happens in the country.
And that was former Senator Harry Reid, the Democrat, talking to us after last year's Democratic caucus here. His push to have Nevada be the first state to vote on the presidential race is moving forward. The primaries. The Nevada legislature passed a bill at the session that makes the caucus a primary in Nevada and leapfrogs Nevada to first in the session of primaries. Now, in opposition to the bill, Republican Party Chairman Michael McDonald released this statement saying that this measure is, quote, trying to play chicken with primary dates and that he says it's not a battle that we will win. Now, the states in front of Nevada on the primary calendar, caucus calendar in one regard, is Iowa and New Hampshire. Here is a response from New Hampshire's. They've given every indication they would fight this. This is from the Democratic Party chairman, who says, "We have successfully defended the primary for decades and believe that we have a strong argument for New Hampshire to retain its place at the beginning of the queue." Iowa's Democratic Party chairman says it's working to ensure the state has a crucial voice in the nominating process as well. David Charnes, so here's the statement, by the way, from the Iowa chairman. David Charnes spoke with Steve Sebelius from the Review-Journal and I8 News Now about the primary bill while they were in Carson City.
We're once again joined here by 8 News Now political analyst Steve Sebelius, also a politics and government editor with the Review-Journal. Steve, a lot happened, particularly in the late hours last night, going all the way up until that midnight deadline. But I want to talk about the bills that have the most effect for most of us watching at home, which is those election bills.
Yeah, during the pandemic, for the first time, the majority of Nevadans voted by mail. They received the mail ballot by a special action in the legislature. Well, they made that permanent. So now all active registered voters will receive a ballot in the mail unless you opt out and choose, say, I want to go and vote in person and I don't want that mail ballot. You will get a ballot in the mail. A lot of people found it very convenient. It was easy to vote at home, especially with the long ballot that we had.
Right, it was like 2 pages, right,
yeah.
with everybody
front
on
and
it.
back.
Right, and you know, something that's probably going to have national implications, is going to have national implications, not a probable, is this switch to primaries, yeah, and possibly being the first. Now, of course, Iowa has the caucuses, New Hampshire has primaries. They set their dates. This bill would make it the first Tuesday in February. Could we actually be the first in the nation primary?
We could, although New Hampshire state law allows the Secretary of State of New Hampshire to set their primary whenever he wants to make sure that it's first in the nation. So they could still leapfrog us. There's a lot of negotiations, I think, that are going to have to be worked out between the political parties as to who actually goes first, whether we continue with the Iowa caucus first. But one thing is certain, Nevada's caucus is a thing of the past. There will be no more caucuses. You'll go to the polls, you'll vote for your choice for president the way you vote in any other election, and that'll happen once every 4 years.
So the governor now has 10 days to decide what he's going to sign, because, you know, that's how, remember that, I forget what it is, the Let's Have the Make a Bill song, you know,
yes, how Bill becomes
the School of Rock, yeah. So he has to sign this for anything to become law. He can veto it, it doesn't become law, or he can just let it become law on its own. Anything you see that these folks passed that you think he's going to automatically veto? We asked him last night, and he wasn't so forthcoming yet.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of veto potential in the bills that he signed. Democratic House, Democratic Senate sends bills over there. I think they're going to be pretty much aligned with what the governor wants. And he has signaled, I'm sure, behind the scenes what he would like to see, what he would not like to see. So I don't think there'll be a lot of vetoes.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens in the next couple of days. Steve, thanks so much for your insight.
Absolutely.
3 days here. We've been on the ground in Carson City, and we are in Carson City. I'm David Charnes, 8 News Now. Guys, back to you.
As of the taping of this program, so far, Governor SISOLAK has not used a veto, and if he doesn't use one at all, it would be the first session since Governor Kenny Gwinn back in 2003, who also didn't use one at the time. Next on Politics Now, we're going to sort out who's running for what in 2022. A look at the names lining up for Clark County Sheriff and Henderson Mayor, plus this.
Republican legislatures around the country are trying to ban the critical race theory from public school classrooms. Coming up, we'll take a
8 News Now.
Welcome back. Henderson City Councilwoman Michelle Romero plans to run for mayor. Current Mayor Deborah March is term limited in 2022. Romero made the announcement on last Saturday. Now, this position is nonpartisan, but Romero is a Republican. She was just reelected in 2019. Her city council term ends in 2025. Also looking ahead to the next session here, we've got Assemblyman Tom Roberts, who tells Politics Now he plans to run for sheriff.
I did 34 years in law enforcement. I retired to come up here and work in the legislature. I found that I still miss law enforcement. I like it. Just like here, I like serving my community, but I really believe that I could make a difference at Metro if I went back. And there's an opportunity with the sheriff running for governor, and I think I'm going to jump into the race, and I think the voters will be happy with what they get. My message is, look, I want to do what's best for the citizens of Las Vegas. Crime, I think, is always in the back of people's mind, but also the delivery of police services is. I think we do a good job at Metro. I think we can always do better. I think we need to work with the community close to ensure that we're policing the way they want to. And I think Metro does a pretty good job, but I'd like to take it to the next step.
So far, Roberts is the only candidate who has declared the intention to run for sheriff. Sheriff Lombardo is intending to run for governor. Republican state legislatures across the country have been trying to ban something called critical race theory from public schools. Republican lawmakers are attempting to ban what they claim critical race theory teaches students. Proponents say learning about historical injustices can be uncomfortable.
That whites are an oppressor race and other identity groups are oppressed.
I've never heard an educator saying white people are inherently bad.
Joining us now from Washington is Alexander Limon. Alex, let's talk first. What exactly is critical race theory?
Critical race theory is something that is not new. It's actually a concept that's been around for decades, I believe around 40 years or so. And some of the academic experts who study it describe it as a theory where you're encouraged to take a critical lens to examine U.S. history and the role that racism has played in our country's history and that role that it still continues to play in our laws, in our society, and how that racism is embedded in everyday life. And so it encourages people to use critical thinking and, again, that critical lens. So that's the widely academic used definition for it. But in recent months, critical race theory has had a big spotlight on it because Republican lawmakers, both state lawmakers and also here on Capitol Hill, have focused in on this issue, claiming that it actually teaches students to feel guilty about being white, that it teaches students that the white race is an oppressor race and other races are the victims and have been victimized. And they claim that it's a very divisive theory that pits races against each other and is divisive for the country. And so Republican lawmakers and state legislatures around the country, like in Oklahoma, for example, have either already or are in the process of trying to ban it from being taught in public schools.
Well, how frequently is this taught in schools?
Funny you should ask, because it's not. Many school districts around the country have been kind of put in the spotlight and accused of teaching critical race theory. And what all of these school districts have said is that they do not actually teach it. This is not a theory that is used in public K through 12 schools. It is mostly a theory that is used in academic higher learning circles, in colleges, universities, people getting their PhDs, for example, in areas that are related to race and policy.
That was Alex Limon from Washington.
Most watched evening and late news. You're watching Politics Now.
Looking ahead, Boulder City has a municipal election coming up June 15th, and early voting's already underway down there. Runs till June 11th. There's an open city council seat and 2 ballot initiatives. The first is to see if people want to spend $7 million on a new swimming pool. The second is whether or not the city should sell land to fund that project. We have information on this for you at 8newsnow.com. We thank you for watching Politics Now. We'll see you right back here next week.